G'day YouTube, this is Warbles on a lot here, and I'd like to make a little bit of a clip explaining why I think Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki made a mess of his experiment 30 years ago when he attempted to discover if putting a solar panel onto a road vehicle was worth doing. Here we see my 1970s vintage briefcase, and I'm digging out of it my references, pieces of paperwork, things that, you know, from time to time I may want to show people. Stuff that's worth paying attention to. You know, letters from the editor of journals. Yeah, all sorts of stuff. And here we find a letter from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation or Commission's Chief Populist for Science, Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki. He's the Julius Sumner Miller Professor of Science at Sydney University. Okay? He's a sort of a bald bloke who runs to really loud shirts, and he's extremely assertive in his manner. And as far as I know, he's a medical doctor. He has a Bachelor of Science in biochemistry or something similar. And he's got a PhD in mechanical engineering, right? And he, as far as I can recall, he invented and developed a machine for measuring intraocular pressure using a laser beam bounced off the patient's eyeball, right? So he's a pretty smart bloke. Now, way back when, in like 1982, when I was a student nurse, I heard on the radio Dr. Karl, as he was called back then when he was first getting his start in ABC broadcasting on the radio network, and he was talking about how he'd tried putting a solar panel onto his car, and because he was running a statistical universe of one, him and his car, he had a solar panel on the roof rack. He had a secret isolation switch between the solar panel and the battery somewhere. He hasn't told me what style of a regulator he had, but way back in the 1980s, solar regulators as commercially available tended to cut the current when the battery voltage came up to about 13.8, right? Rarely they would go as high as 14 volts. This is kind of critical to this entire story. I wasn't aware of it until recently, say the last 3 or 4 months, maybe 6 months. But the point is that his solar regulator was only trying to raise the battery to probably 13.8 to 14 volts. The regulator on his automotive alternator driven by the engine, it was probably trying to raise the car's battery voltage to between 13.8 and 14.3 volts, because that's kind of like the automotive industry standard. Okay, so close the parentheses on that little comment. 30 years ago I heard Karl Kruszelnicki say on the radio that when he tried with a double-blind isolation switch, because somebody else was tossing a coin to determine switch up or switch down, and writing that in a diary either twice a week, once a fortnight, every time he refueled, some time interval along that area, he determined at the end of a year that there was no difference at all whatsoever to the fuel burn by having a solar panel on the roof of his car. And he said 30 years ago on the radio that Technically, theoretically, this meant that he must have been destroying energy, and therefore something must have been wrong with the experiment. But, however, for 30 odd years, Karl Kruszelnicki has been claiming that there's no point putting a solar panel on the roof of a car. So 4 years ago, when I found that putting a 5-watt array on the roof of my car, little 1.8 litre Subaru, saved me 1.5 litres a week. And when we tried a 20-watt panel on my son's car, saved 4.2 litres a week. His was a Brumby, Subaru Brumby, same size engine, 1.8 litres. So I put a 30-watt panel on the roof of my car and saved 5.3 litres a week. A friend of mine with a Holden V6 Commodore station wagon put a 30-watt panel on it, but his odometer doesn't work, so he has no idea how much he's saving. What he did say was he had noticeable extra torque while driving an automatic. A week ago I put the 30-watt Mark V onto my son's Rodeo because the Brumby had been sold 6 months ago at auction. Somebody went to a car auction in Sydney or Brisbane and found themselves going home with a world-leading solar piston hybrid motor vehicle. But there's a bloke down in Canberra, name of Dave. He's got a blog site and a YouTube channel called Dave's Act, lowercase D-A-V-E-S-A-C-T. And I don't know, 6 weeks ago, Dave's Act saw some of my YouTube movies, thought about it, couldn't see any holes in the idea. He ordered a 20-watt panel and stuck it on his Ford Explorer. 13 days ago he put the panel on the roof. He's claiming that twice a week he puts $50 worth of fuel into his car and he's getting 35 extra kilometres per fill. So he's claiming 70 kilometres per week for free, more or less, because he put a solar panel on the roof. It cost him $135 for the solar panel, right? Now, why is it that I've had such a great result? My son's had such a great result. My friend who lived down on the alternative lifestyle community, he had such a great result. Dave's Act at Canberra, he's had such a great result. And Karl Kruszelnicki says he had no result at all. Well, if he had no result at all, it means that he never had his solar panel talking to his battery ever at all whatsoever. It means that a PhD in mechanical engineering can't wire up a solar panel to a battery via a regulator with an isolation switch in such a fashion that the solar panel ever talks to the battery regardless of the switch position. If he fair dinkum got a null result, no change at all whatsoever, on the days when the solar panel was charging the battery, when the car was sitting in the car park, the battery would have been at a higher resting voltage, and when he started the engine he would have used less fuel. If he got an absolutely null result, it means he was either breaking all the laws of thermodynamics or he made a mess of his wiring. The other thing working against him is that his alternator back in the 1980s was quite possibly out-volting his solar regulator. During the 1990s and early 2000s, the manufacturers of solar battery regulators decided that if the battery voltage dropped below 11.5 degrees, the regulator needed to take the battery voltage up to around 14.5 to 14.8 volts in order to burn the sulfate off the plates caused by 2 or 3 days of cloudy conditions with not enough solar panel power. So therefore, sometime in the last 15 years, solar regulators have gained the capacity that when a car's engine starter motor sucks 98 amps for 2 seconds or so and draws the battery voltage below 11.5 degrees, the solar regulator automatically goes into anti-sulfation mode, and it's going to take the battery voltage all the way up to 14.5 to 14.8 volts. The regulator on the alternator is going to perceive the solar input as battery voltage and therefore charge condition. So thus and because the alternator is going to back off its input until it's at minimum input, which in my car's condition is 0.05 of an amp, right? And when the alternator can only put a 20th of an amp into the battery, it's virtually causing no magnetic drag to be magnified by the step-up ratio and applied to the crankshaft. So the only real serious physical work that the engine has to do to turn the alternator is bending of the belt plus running the cooling fan, which is attached to the alternator's rotor shaft. And the cooling fan is designed to provide enough cooling air for maximum power at minimum RPM, because that's what alternators are designed for. So yeah, you could possibly re-engineer the front end of the alternator with an electromagnetic clutch, and that would give you an even bigger fuel saving. Or you could redesign and rebuild the entire exhaust system so that you have a power recovery turbine in the exhaust gas driving a reduction gearbox driving the alternator, and you could have a turbine electric drive. You could faintly possibly run several other accessory systems on the exhaust gas as well, but just let's run the headlights on them. And you're still going to need a solar panel on the roof, because the average engine runtime is not enough to finish recharging a car battery using a voltage demand regulated alternator, right? You must have a solar panel, and it would be better to drive the alternator with a windmill in the exhaust rather than a step-up belt drive off the crankshaft, because there's always twice as much energy in the exhaust gas flow as is coming out the crankshaft in a fairly bog standard piston engine like you're going to find in a motor car that you can buy off the shop floor, right? You don't get to buy the racing car with the 35% efficient engine. You're lucky to get something with a 31% efficient engine if you're buying a turbocharged intercooled diesel, right? The same way as the alternator that's rated at 50% efficiency at peak at 4,000 RPM, it spends most of its time at 25% efficiency. And that's why a SunFoil works as well as it does. When we put a 20 watt panel on a Subaru Brumby, the fuel burn improved for 3 months, right? There was an average 15% fuel burn improvement on the highway, and there was a 38% fuel burn improvement driving in city traffic. With a 30 watt panel on my 1800 touring wagon, which spends 75% of its time on the highway, 20% in town at less than 50 kilometres an hour, and 5% off-road four-wheel drive, if I cruise at 100 kilometres an hour, I'm 26.3% better off. Cruising at 105 kilometres an hour, I'm 22.5% better off. I seriously expect Dave's Act is going to get somewhere between 30 and 50% overall fuel burn improvement sometime in the next 2.5 months when his car stabilises, especially as he's about to fit another 20 watt panel, right? He's going to have a 40 watt solar array on his Ford Explorer, and that's probably somewhere what he needs. If you check the movie title SunFoil Short Talk, you'll get the complete formula for how to measure your vehicle for its optimum size solar panel, as well as the CSIRO evaluation of my SunFoil project, wherein they spent 5 months checking it and couldn't find any bullshit. Dr. Karl is playing Samuel Langley to my Wright brothers. This really works. These are Dave's Acts figures, and he's at 35 degrees south. I'm at 30 degrees south. Ciao.